Picture this. It's a warm blue day and the sun is out, and there's a 4-year-old little girl standing in the back with her tiny little shoes, her native corte, and her turquoise lace shirt, with a set of vibrant green leaves in the back, raising her fist as she unconsciously recognizes her inner strength and resiliency. It was a year of August of 2001 when this girl's little life completely changed. To forget who she was and where she came from. To forget the richness of her country's food and the smell of the tierra. All I can remember is being stuffed like a sardine can, being told, "Mija, por favor, cállate, ya casi llegamos." "Sweetie, please be quiet, we're almost there." My arrival to the US is very vivid. All I can remember is being up in the air and waking up and screaming because I was so scared. And right when we landed, we were immediately welcomed by my family, who at the time gave me this little gift right here, this teddy bear, which at the time had a little green bow. And as you can see here, it no longer has that. But I always keep it with me, and I bring it with me nowadays because it is my reminder, right, of arriving here to the US. I remember my family, when we arrived to the US, we immediately arrived to the outskirts of Forest Grove, a city just 40 minutes out from Portland, Oregon, where you would often see Confederate flags like it was nothing. I remember when I arrived here, I spoke no English. I spoke very little Spanish, and I spoke one of the many native languages spoken in Guatemala, which is Canjobal. And I remember most of the time we would spend in my childhood out in the countryside rather than being in the city. I remember me and my cousins would constantly make these little grass cakes that we would fill up with mud in an old pan, put some leaves and twigs and sticks, and then sit on them because that's how we baked them. Eventually, we'd pull them out of the oven, and we would try them. And they were definitely not tasty whatsoever. But it's one of those memories that I always carry with me to this day because it is one of my memorable memories that I've had with my family. So now that my childhood has just ended, I had to start school. And I was immediately pressured to learn English so that I could fit into this new world, into this new home. I remember my cousins would always, late at night, we would be learning and speaking to each other. I would teach them Spanish, they would teach me English. And that's how we communicated. And had it not been for them, I would have not been ready for school at the age of 5. I remember when I entered school, I felt completely lost. I entered into this new world, and that's where I recognized that this new home was not anything like my past home. I remember constantly going to the library with my father so that I could practice my English and Spanish, because at the time, I knew that I needed to fit into this new world. When I think about it now, a lot of the friends and the people that are around me did not understand me. They didn't understand why I was speaking with an accent. They didn't understand why I was talking to my cousins in Spanish. They didn't understand why I wasn't able to communicate with them. And it was very painful and very hard because I had a really hard time trying to understand myself and trying to understand how I would communicate with people and when I just wanted to play with them. But I'm very thankful that my family was there to support me in that process because had it not been for them, things would have been very difficult. And with all the practicing with English and trying to assimilate into this new world, it did not save me from being featured in the local newspaper as one of the first Hispanics in my all-white school. It took me a while to recognize why this little Mayan girl had to be featured in the newspaper. It took me a while to understand why me and my family were featured as the rare ones. We were those rare moments because there were no other brown or black folks in our area. We were the only ones. And even as much as we tried to fit in, Our cultural traditions, our custom wear, our accents, it didn't save us from this city for sticking out. As I continued my elementary years, I eventually moved from this all-white school into a predominantly Spanish-speaking school, where I struggled to fit in as well. Even though I wanted to be belonging around my white peers, I constantly tried to fit in with those who were Mexicanos. And to some people, that seems like that's great, right? Because you get to connect with people who look like you and who can speak the same language as you. But for me, that was never the case. I found myself constantly struggling, trying to fit in with one or the other group. But I always recognized that I just never felt like I belonged. It came to the point where on one side, I'm being told, stupid Mexican, go back to where you came from and learn English. Where on the other side, I was constantly being reminded that I'm not Mexicana, that I, quote, do not look Mexican because I'm not dark and short-skinned. And it was a really hard time for me to recognize how painful that was. But in those moments, I knew that they were not just speaking about me, but they were speaking about a larger problem that we have in this society. They didn't realize that they were talking about the constant racism that people from Latin America face from people from Mexico. Or the idea that we have to accept this new world, that we have to be speaking only English and not accepting the rest of society as it is, and the diverse communities that we have. The awakening of my identity crisis didn't happen until I started and entered into this program called Chicas, which is a pilot program that one of our local nonprofit here in Forest Grove runs, Adelante Mujeres, where they bring awareness of not just only educational development, but also identity crisis and culture connection. When I entered into these sessions, I was constantly meeting new people, but I was also learning a lot of these new ideas and new terms, like the term Latina. And that's where I really wanted to learn more about myself and my family and our culture. When I entered into middle school, as if things had not already been difficult enough in middle school, I remember constantly struggling with trying to fit in and trying to see where my new surroundings were going to be. I remember feeling constantly ashamed of my parents, of bringing along them with me because of how they would act and how they would dress. And it came to the point where I got into this really deep hole. I remember feeling ashamed of myself, feeling guilty, and just feeling lost and disconnected. And there was a point in time in that moment that I almost did leave this world. I remember sitting home, eating one of those tamarindo balls that you just suck on that has all these spiciness and sweetness to it. And out of nowhere, I started choking on it. And my first instinct was I needed to immediately run to the bathroom and try to get out. So I went to the bathroom and I was constantly pressuring my chest and my stomach and hitting myself so that I could take this candy out. And I just remember that feeling of life being sucked out of me. I couldn't breathe. I remember as if it was just like a vacuum that was just sucking you right up. And after the constant pressuring and putting myself to take it out, I was eventually able to let it go, and I spit it out and I survived. And thankfully, I didn't die. But one thing that I had never really told people, and even though I share this story a lot of times, and I laugh about it because it's something that to me, it's happened, it's been a while, and so I don't really necessarily think about the death part anymore. But what I don't tell people is, for a split second, I do remember this idea coming to life into my head and saying, Petrona, you can end your struggle right here. This is where you can stop it. People would remember you as a girl who died because she choked on a candy, rather than knowing the real truth about why you wanted to leave this world. It was a feeling that I remember in those action movies where you just have like that split second of just thinking of all these things coming into your head. And then eventually, once I spit that candy out, I realized how terrifying that moment was for me, because I could have made that choice to let myself go, because I didn't want to tell my family. I didn't want to tell my friends, and especially my teachers around me, about what I was going through. So even though this moment of mine, I laugh about it, and I think about how funny it is that I almost died because of a candy, I never think about that split second to remind folks of what really happened. So as I entered into high school, I was already feeling a deep hole, and I was feeling depressed and disconnected from life. That this is a moment where I had to add on another layer to my struggle. I remember thinking back and remembering why my parents never allowed me to go and out and be with friends. I remember my family constantly telling me to not speak about myself or let me go on trips when I wanted to go to Korea, as one example. And it wasn't until we had this workshop in high school, and it was fast food season time, and we went to this workshop, and we were only there for the first 3 minutes, because the moment my parents saw the paper and noticed that one of the requirements was a Social Security, we immediately left. And it wasn't till then that I realized what that meant for me. Although they didn't explicitly say to me that I was undocumented, they made it clear that I was not going to be able to have the same life as my cousins. And that's when I came to realize about my immigration status. My parents immediately allowed me to apply for the program called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which gave me a temporary relief from deportation, but it also allowed me to be able to go to work and get my state ID. And even though it sucks to constantly have to remind yourself that you have to renew your freedom for 2 years, it's something that I definitely don't take for granted. Immediately after high school, I decided to go to PCC, which is one of our closest, Portland Community College, one of our closest colleges here in Oregon. And through PCC, I applied for this program called the Oregon Leadership Institute program, which really supported me in not only learning more about my identity crisis through our ethnic studies courses, but it also helped me to make these connections and to connect with people who were also facing something similar to me. And a lot of our connection came down to our immigration status. And it was folks like Lily, who was not only MC coordinator, but became a mentor to me. And then my friends, Joanna and Christian and Eddie and Olivier, and many more. I remember one of the biggest accomplishments that I had from this program was that I applied for the United States Hispanic Leadership Institute Program Award, and I was accepted. And it was something national that to me became so meaningful because of the fact that I had just shared my story with people that I did not know. I allowed myself to put myself and face that fear of not only my identity crisis, but also my immigration status. And folks behind reading that paper would realize, right, the person that I am and not who they expect me to be. My years at PCC really became very meaningful to me. Had it not been for the connections that I had with folks around me and having those friends that became like family to me, this would be a completely another story. I always remind myself that our immigration stories make us who we are because that's part of our journey and that's part of our experiences. But I also I always have to remind myself that as someone who has not only just gone through her immigration status revelation, I'm also constantly reminding myself of this identity crisis that really hit me hard at one point in my life. And when I think back to this picture that I asked you all to picture earlier today, I look at it, and when I see it, I remind myself, Petrona, it's okay. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna do great things and you're going to inspire people. And I think about this picture a lot and think about my ancestors who are guiding me at every moment. But it also reminds me to tell us one quick story, and that is that us as immigrants, we are unique, and we all have our different paths. Unfortunately, some of us, when we're immigrating to these new countries, we're not only facing our immigration status, but we're also facing our identity crises, especially for those of us who are coming from Central America and are facing that racism from other places. And so it's always a reminder to know that it should not take us a sad story to compel us to be here and to listen, to take action. But also to understand that we are all unique in our own way and we all have our shared immigrant experiences. But what makes us connected is that we are human beings trying to belong into the society. And even though I'm grateful that I didn't have to experience such a hard time arriving here to the US, I know that my own story and my experiences and all the barriers and challenges that I have had in my life come down to this point where I am today, standing here in front of you and sharing my part of my story with you.